Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex Lord. A ton of stuff to get into from the NFL to the Braves, but we're going to start with college football. It was one of those sleepy Saturdays, as we talked about last week, where there's potential for upsets, but not a lot of ranked versus ranked matchups. There were no upsets. You know, everyone this was about the week of almost upsets, right? You go look, we talked about South Carolina. They were up 17-0 on LSU. LSU's able to pull that one out. Both teams kind of looked like they didn't really want to win the game. They both made so many mistake after mistake after mistake. Comes down to a potential game-tying field goal. South Carolina misses. LSU escapes. It kind of seemed like that was a win for both programs, where LSU was really looking at maybe their playoff lives through 3 weeks. I mean, you have to assume they lose that game, that they have a very, very slim margin for error, and they still have Ole Miss and Alabama remaining on the schedule. They'd have to probably win both of those games. They come out alive. They got to feel good. They got to feel a little bit thankful. On the flip side of things, South Carolina hoping to build some momentum. They lose that. But then the bigger upset that almost happened also in the SEC was the team that South Carolina beat. Kentucky, who looked lifeless against South Carolina, comes out and gives Georgia all they can handle. Now, Georgia ends up winning that game. I think when we talked about this last week, you know, this is something that I think Georgia is going to look back on and be, you know, thankful that it happened this early. This is something that actually really isn't atypical in the Kirby Smart era. You know, he has struggled with Kentucky. It almost seems like they always have the same game plan: go in there, run the ball, get out there with a win, no matter how ugly it looks. He's also struggled in the first game of SEC plays over the last several years. But I think the biggest question that I said before the season, I thought we were going to see it more against Clemson, was these Georgia weapons. You know, who is going to be the guy? I think we now have a lot more questions about those guys moving forward, especially when you look ahead to Alabama's coming up. You got a road at the Ole Miss, road at Texas, and also Tennessee on the schedule.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia's schedule is absolutely brutal as we're, you know, as things start to shake out. Like Tennessee, you know, we're going to learn a lot about Tennessee this week against Oklahoma, but the thought is that Tennessee's a pretty damn good football team. So, you know, Georgia,
at the very least, they're college football playoff contenders.
They get them in Athens, so that helps a lot. But yeah, I'll stick with Georgia. I think Carson Beck, you know, I think from what I did see, I was at my brother's wedding. What I did see from Georgia, Beck's got to be a little bit better in some of these big games where, you know, it did feel like in moments across the 2 seasons with Stetson Bennett that he would just put the team on his back. Now, again, to your point, he had Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is the greatest tight end in college football history. So he did have him to lean on. But even still, I mean, it felt like at times throughout his 2 seasons as a starter, Stetson Bennett did it time and time again where he would put the team on his back with his feet and with his arms. He would do it. Carson Beck just hasn't quite done it yet. And I think, you know, that's what I'm looking for. I think this Georgia defense, you know, it's pretty damn good. Again, Kentucky's offense, you know, not world beaters. Brock Vandergrift, not a world beater. But obviously, you know, Georgia's defense is pretty damn good. As far as LSU and South Carolina's got to be kicking themselves Sunday morning and Monday morning because they let that one go. They should have won that football game going away. LSU in every single facet of the game, offense, defense, special teams, should be, you know, Brian Kelly at the press conferences and stuff is just shameful. I don't know really what he's saying. He's praising these guys for the resilience they had down 17-0 and to a point. Yeah, I guess that's true. But also, let's call a spade a spade. You sucked. You sucked for pretty much 4 quarters and barely escaped South Carolina with a victory. I think, you know, Garrett Nussmeier played really well, but he had a couple of bad moments. The special teams, Brian Kelly still doesn't have a special teams coach, and special teams is once again a weak spot for LSU. It's like, time to grow up, buddy. This isn't 1930. Get a special teams coach. Budget isn't an issue. Blake Baker and the defense were once again soft. I mean, they came up with some timely stops at the end, but again, you're stopping a South Carolina offense where, first of all, they were bad to begin with, and then their quarterback goes down. They're really bad. Like, how much do we really credit Blake Baker and that LSU defense? That South Carolina offense was absolutely pitiful. There's so many things here, you know, to bash LSU, but the overarching theme is you got the win, you get out of there. Hopefully you look back and that was the worst game you've played all season. That's the hope. You got UCLA, you got South Alabama, you got an open date, and then you got Ole Miss. And if you play like that against Ole Miss, you're going to get beat 60-20. You're going to get beat up and down the field in front of your home crowd by an Ole Miss team that you've really dominated for pretty much the entirety of y'all's little rivalry. I'm sitting back, and I know we won, and I know, that's all that really matters. Sometimes an ugly win is certainly better than a pretty loss. But I'm sitting here really questioning, who is this LSU football team? As far as South Carolina, that defense, I think, that pass rush at least is absolutely for real. That defense is pretty damn good.
Yeah, I mean, it's early in the season. I'm not nearly as down on the way that LSU performed, because I do put a lot of weight in the fact that they did go down 17-0 in a hostile environment and still figured out a way to win. I thought Nuss, for the most part, outside of that one pick that probably should have been a pick six, and LSU should be thanking their lucky stars that they got called back and were able to stop them, get the ball back, and then win the game.
Yeah, they beat themselves.
But I think at the end of the day, I think there was a lot of things, if you're an LSU fan, that you can hang your hat on. I think overall the defense came up with a lot of stops. They had a couple of big plays. South Carolina had that first drive where they looked fantastic, and LSU's defense looked very soft. Outside of that, if they can clean up the 75-yard touchdown runs, if they can clean up those two things, every other drive. I mean, South Carolina had the ball a lot, and it seemed like LSU kept coming up with stops when they needed them. Now, their quarterback going out certainly helped it. I thought they were able to establish the run, which we haven't seen in a long time. I thought that freshman Durham was absolutely the game-changing. He changed the entire thing of the game. So if that's something that they can have moving forward, because once they were able to establish the run, this South Carolina pass rush was a little neutralized. They were able to open up the pass game.
The best thing I saw Joe Sloan do that day, who's the offensive coordinator, and it was the first time all season where I came away where I was like, okay, that was a great job by our offensive coordinator, was moving the pocket. When he started moving Garrett Nussmeier out of the pocket, or at least just rolling him a little bit, and neutralized South Carolina's pass rush, which might be the best in the SEC.
Yeah. I mean, it's
pretty damn good. That was the best thing I saw from Joe Sloan, who has, right now, other than that, is really out kicking his coverage in terms of the job he has and what he's done with it.
Yeah, but let's get back to Georgia here, because I think the bigger question is how can Georgia mitigate this schedule that they have? How can they navigate through it? Because the schedule is unbelievably difficult. And these games that we were kind of just penciling in as, Georgia's going to be the favorite, they're not going to be the favorite walking into Texas. They're not. They will not be the favorite walking into Texas, whether they should be or whether they're not. Ole Miss is going to be a lot closer. I don't know what the Alabama line is, but I guarantee you it's under a field goal by kickoff. These games are now no longer looking like Georgia is a huge favorite.
They got an open week. Bama's coming off that win against Wisconsin, and that's the Bama team. If they didn't shoot themselves in the foot versus USF, that's what that game would have looked like. Bama just imposing their will on an inferior team. Jalen Milroe hurting defenses with his arm and his legs. That is the exact Alabama football team, and we thought so. We thought Alabama was going to go out and cover against Wisconsin, who is an inferior football team in every single facet of the game. Now they got to host Georgia, who Bama's got to be feeling confident. And Georgia's coming off an awful game.
And listen, and I'm like I said, I think this is going to be a good thing in the grand scheme of things. Does Georgia have a long way to go? There's no doubt about it.
Yeah,
but one thing you can talk about Kirby Smart, you can say the same thing about Nick Saban. It's a process getting to it. And are they going to go undefeated? I have a hard time believing they go undefeated and beat every single team on their schedule. But it's about being the best version of yourself at the end of the season, especially when you have a 12-team playoff. And that's really, that's what Georgia has to figure out. They have to keep improving week by week. This isn't going to be the Georgia team that goes out there and stomps everybody by 40 points, especially with that schedule, and just waltzes in there 15-0. They're going to have tough games. They're probably going to have a loss or two on their schedule. But can they be the best version of themselves when it matters at the end of the season? That's Kirby Smart's job. That's what he's really good at. And I think this is going to end up helping them. But listen, my biggest takeaway from the entire SEC, right, is this is why it's wide open. It's as wide open as it's been in a long time. I mean, you have legitimate contenders in Tennessee, Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas, Alabama. I mean, any one of those 5 teams from what I've watched could win the SEC, and I would believe you. I mean, they all look very, very good. And then Georgia obviously looks a little bit more vulnerable, at least from their first game against Kentucky. So I think that was my biggest takeaway. This thing is as wide open as it's been a long time.
To push back a little bit, Georgia's the only team out of all of those who've actually played some, but Texas, well, see, again, I'm not very high on Michigan, but people are, you can only, play the guys in front of you. Georgia's about the only team who's actually played somebody worth a damn, because I'm not
Kentucky worth a damn.
Well, it's an SEC game, so an SEC game is always going to be tough, in my opinion. But Clemson is a team that I still am not very high on. But they go out, they score 7 touchdowns right after getting their stuff stomped in by Georgia. So I think to Georgia's credit, this has happened every single year. Missouri a couple years ago, they go on, escape Columbia with barely winning. They go win a national championship. The next year, Kentucky gave them a run for their money. They go out and win a national championship. So I agree with you that this kind of stumble or falter or whatever you want to say is not going to be who this Georgia Bulldogs team is next week in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, no,
you can absolutely count.
Yeah. But I just think, listen, the playing field has been leveled. It's closer than I think we might have thought out of Clemson. And I think there are 5 teams in the SEC that look like they could win it. And like I said, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if any one of those
Georgia's offense and Beck and Bobo need to get it together.
Yeah, and they needed to get it together quickly because Tuscaloosa is right around the country, right around the corner. We're all waiting for it. It's going to be a showdown in T-Town.